This man thought he had just stolen an $800 million company from his wife. But within just 72 hours, the FBI was at his front door. What's even more terrifying is this: his wife had known everything for months in advance. So who is really the one being played? In Austin, Texas, Evelyn Carter is the founder of Nexora Systems, a rapidly growing AI cybersecurity company that has captured the attention of the entire tech industry. While her name continues to appear across major business publications, her husband, Richard Carter, 54, has been going through the darkest period of his life. After years as a senior engineer in Silicon Valley, he suddenly lost his job. Since then, Richard has become almost unrecognizable. He suffers from chronic insomnia, avoids social interaction, and often sits alone in the dark for hours. Doctors have diagnosed him with severe depression. Out of concern for her husband, Evelyn scaled back her workload to care for him. When the family attorney suggested she sign a temporary power of attorney, intended to help Richard regain a sense of purpose and self-worth, she agreed. But just 2 weeks later, Richard called an emergency shareholder meeting and announced that Evelyn was no longer fit to lead the very company she had founded. Richard began his speech in a calm, measured tone, like a CEO delivering a quarterly report to the board. Growth charts filled the large screen. Revenue figures, market expansion rates, and profit projections flashed one after another. For the first few minutes, nothing seemed out of place. Even Evelyn assumed this was just a routine internal review. Then everything changed. Without warning, Richard pivoted from business metrics to a personal attack. He looked directly at Evelyn in front of dozens of investors and smirked. Technology is evolving too fast. Maybe middle-aged women should stay home and learn to bake instead of trying to run AI. The room went silent. A few people laughed instinctively, then quickly stopped when they realized he was completely serious. The air turned heavy. Evelyn sat frozen, unable to process what she had just heard from the man she had spent more than 20 years with. But the real shock hadn't even begun. When the vote took place, Nexora's 3 largest investors suddenly sided with Richard. These were the same people who had publicly praised Evelyn as the soul of the company. So what changed? What did they know that she didn't? Less than an hour after the meeting ended, Evelyn discovered that her top-level admin account had been completely disabled. She couldn't access internal systems, couldn't send company emails, couldn't reach the engineering team. The next 20 minutes were even worse. One by one, her server access privileges vanished, as if they had never existed. Every digital door that once belonged to the company's founder slammed shut in her face. As Evelyn scrambled to figure out what was happening, another message came through. Jason Miller, the chief engineer, and the person she trusted most, had just submitted his resignation. No explanation, no call, not even a message. Had Jason been bought off? Or was he hiding something? While everyone else was focused on the internal crisis, Richard quietly began transferring Nexora's most valuable assets to an undisclosed intermediary company. Legal documents were signed in secrecy. Streams of data were continuously copied and moved. No one knew the final destination. No one except Richard. A week later, an unusual financial transaction appeared in an investigative report. A sum of $47 million had been transferred into Richard's personal account from a completely anonymous source. Evelyn stared at the number. Why would a man who had just lost his job suddenly receive that kind of money? The deeper she dug, the more disturbing the details became. Everything Richard had said about being laid off years ago no longer seemed true. Old records began to reveal an entirely different story. And as she read the first documents, a chill ran down her spine. If Richard wasn't a victim of the AI wave like he had claimed for years, then why was he really fired from his previous company? Refusing to accept what was happening, Evelyn hired an independent investigator, someone who had spent years working with U.S. law firms specializing in corporate fraud. She wasn't looking for revenge. She just wanted the truth. If Richard had truly betrayed her, she needed proof. Just days later, the first report arrived. What it revealed left even Evelyn stunned. For years, Richard had claimed he was a victim of the AI-driven layoffs sweeping through Silicon Valley. It was a story he repeated to family, friends, and even the media. But internal records told a completely different story. Richard wasn't laid off. He was forced out. According to the investigation, his former company discovered that he had illegally accessed internal research databases and copied confidential materials tied to active development projects. The breach was serious enough that leadership considered pursuing criminal charges. But to avoid a public scandal that could send their stock price crashing, they chose silence. Richard was asked to leave immediately. No press release, no public statement, no one outside the company ever knew. But that wasn't even the worst part. The investigator uncovered a non-disclosure agreement Richard had signed years earlier. It included strict clauses prohibiting him from collaborating with or sharing technology with a long list of direct competitors in the cybersecurity space. Richard had violated nearly all of them. As financial records and communication logs were traced, the picture became clearer. A chain of encrypted emails led to a name that made everything for Evelyn: Titan Dynamics, Nexora's biggest rival, a company that had repeatedly failed to compete with her AI products. And now it appeared in every trail the investigator followed. Then the final piece fell into place. The $47 million wasn't an investment. It wasn't a bonus. It wasn't a consulting fee. It was payment for source code. Titan Dynamics had paid Richard $47 million to obtain Nexora's core technology. In other words, Richard had just illegally sold the brain of the very company his wife built. Evelyn's legal team immediately urged her to file an emergency motion in court. But what confused everyone was Evelyn's reaction. She didn't get angry. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just sat quietly in the conference room, silently reading the report. Then she smiled. The legal team exchanged puzzled looks. Finally, one of them spoke. "If all of this is true, why are you so calm?" Evelyn looked up. Her voice was strangely steady. "Because what he took isn't what he thinks it is." The room fell completely silent. No one understood what she meant. That's when Evelyn revealed the secret she had been keeping for months. Even before Richard requested power of attorney, she had already started suspecting his unusual behavior. Certain access logs showed unauthorized checks. Strange copies of data appeared without clear origin. Every sign pointed to someone trying to get their hands on Nexora's core technology. Instead of confronting him directly, Evelyn made a different choice. She created a special version of the source code. On the surface, it looked identical to the real system, but underneath, it was a highly sophisticated honeypot, a digital trap. If anyone stole it and deployed it at scale, the embedded vulnerabilities would activate automatically, causing critical system failures across the entire operation. It was a method cybersecurity experts used to test the greed of data thieves. But one question still remained, one even Evelyn didn't have the answer to. Did Richard actually take the bait? Or had he somehow discovered her plan and stolen the real code instead? No one knew, until the day Titan Dynamics decided to officially activate the system they had just paid $47 million for. 72 hours after Titan Dynamics officially deployed the new system across the entire company, the unthinkable happened. Disaster erupted. At first, it was just minor errors appearing on secondary servers. A few engineers assumed it was nothing more than routine configuration issues following a system upgrade. But less than an hour later, red alerts began flashing nonstop across the network operations center. Then everything spiraled out of control. Titan Dynamics' entire network started going offline. Critical servers failed one after another. Platforms used by thousands of enterprise clients were suddenly disrupted. Engineers worked through the night, but no one could identify the cause. With every passing minute, the damage grew worse. And that was only the beginning. While the technical team struggled to stabilize the system, an even more serious problem emerged. Millions of internal data logs were suddenly exposed. Massive amounts of operational data, financial reports, and customer information began surfacing across multiple tech forums. Titan Dynamics leadership was stunned. What they had just paid $47 million for was turning into the worst nightmare in the company's history. Just hours after the news broke, Titan Dynamics' largest client announced the termination of their contract, a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars and the company's most critical revenue stream. When the market opened the next morning, investors reacted violently. Titan Dynamics stock plummeted 10%, 25%, 40%, then over 60% in a matter of hours. Major financial networks began covering the story nonstop. Analysts called it one of the fastest tech collapses in years. Panic spread throughout the executive team. They needed answers, and they needed them immediately. An emergency investigation team was formed to trace the origin of the code behind the disaster. Thousands of system logs were analyzed, financial transactions were reviewed, every email and technology transfer record was examined. The final result left the boardroom in silence. Every trail led to one person, Richard Carter. Titan Dynamics immediately demanded an explanation. Richard insisted he was completely innocent. He claimed the code had been taken directly from Nexora and had never been altered. He even suggested that Evelyn herself was behind everything. But no one believed him. The damage unfolding in real time made every explanation meaningless. The situation grew worse when an independent team of cybersecurity experts was brought in to analyze the failed system. After days of investigation, they delivered a shocking conclusion. The code deployed by Titan Dynamics contained multiple fake components specifically designed to detect intellectual property theft. In other words, it wasn't a finished product. It was a trap. A honeypot designed to track and mark anyone attempting to use the technology without authorization. For the first time since his plan began, Richard felt real fear. He started to realize he might have walked into a trap that had been set long before he even made his move. Still, Richard believed he had one last chance to turn things around. At least, that's what he thought. A few days later, Richard held a surprise press conference. In front of dozens of reporters, he released a series of internal emails which he claimed proved that Evelyn had prior knowledge of the source code transfer. If those emails were real, Evelyn could be seen as the one who orchestrated the entire scheme. Within hours, the media began to question everything. Was Richard actually the victim? Was Evelyn hiding something? It seemed like the narrative was starting to shift. But then digital forensics experts were brought in. They examined every file, every piece of metadata, and every edit history. The conclusion came quickly. The emails had been manipulated. Content had been added after they were originally sent. Some subject lines had even been generated using digital editing tools. Richard's final piece of evidence collapsed in front of the public. At that point, he had nowhere left to go. Titan Dynamics turned their back on him. Investors turned their back on him. The media turned their back on him. But Richard still didn't realize that the most devastating blow was yet to come. Because somewhere, someone was holding evidence that could completely destroy every lie he had built over the years. And now, there was only one question left. Who was the one secretly providing the evidence that would bring Richard's entire world crashing down? The federal hearing drew the attention of the tech world across the United States. Media crews gathered outside the courthouse early in the morning. Investors, attorneys, and reporters all wanted to witness the outcome of the scandal shaking the cybersecurity industry. Richard walked into the courtroom with the last traces of confidence he had left. Despite everything turning against him, he still believed the prosecution wouldn't be able to prove that he had intentionally stolen the technology. His lawyers continued to insist that Richard was merely a business consultant caught in a dispute between two corporations. Then the surprise witness appeared. The courtroom doors opened. The man who walked in made Richard freeze. It was Jason Miller, the very same chief engineer who had abruptly left Nexora months earlier. The same man Richard believed had turned against Evelyn and sided with him. But the truth was the exact opposite. Jason had never betrayed Evelyn. From the moment she began to suspect Richard, Evelyn had secretly given Jason a special assignment. He continued to play the role of a disgruntled employee, quietly approaching those attempting to steal Nexora's technology. For months, Jason tracked Richard's every move without revealing a single hint. The evidence presented in court silenced the entire room. Phone calls, emails, meetings, data transfer agreements, all of it had been legally documented through internal investigative procedures and proper legal channels. For the first time, Richard had nothing left to say. But the most devastating blow was still coming. The prosecution went on to present financial records tied to the $47 million transfer. For months, Richard had insisted it was legitimate compensation for consulting work. Financial experts proved otherwise. The money had been transferred at the exact time Nexora's data was copied and handed over to Titan Dynamics. The payment terms were directly tied to the delivery of proprietary technology. In other words, the $47 million wasn't a consulting fee. It was undeniable evidence of corporate fraud. The hearing was essentially over after that. Civil and commercial lawsuits quickly followed. Major clients of Titan Dynamics filed claims for damages. Investors sued the leadership over massive financial losses. Not long after, Titan Dynamics officially filed for bankruptcy protection. Richard now faced a lengthy prison sentence, along with tens of millions of dollars in damages. It seemed like everything was over. But Evelyn still had one final move. While the media focused on the collapse of Richard and Titan Dynamics, she quietly assembled an investment group to acquire the most valuable remaining assets of her rival. Patents, data centers, client contracts, and promising technologies were purchased at a fraction of their true value. Within a year, Nexora expanded at an unprecedented scale. Titan Dynamics clients migrated to Nexora. Top engineers from the rival company gradually joined Evelyn's team. Market share surged. From a woman once pushed out of her own company, Evelyn became one of the most influential female CEOs in the American cybersecurity industry. And Richard? He lost his career, his reputation, his relationships, his freedom. And sitting alone, facing the consequences of his own actions, Richard finally realized the most painful truth of all. The one person he could never defeat was the woman who had always stood beside him. Richard had everything many people dream of: a family, a respected career, and a wife who always believed in him. But instead of taking pride in Evelyn's success, he allowed jealousy to grow quietly over the years. In the end, his inability to accept that his wife had surpassed him led him down a path that destroyed his life. But the real question is, was everything Richard did simply driven by selfishness, envy, and ego? Or did the invisible pressure of society, where many men are taught they must be more successful than women, play a role in shaping who he became? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.